Welcome back to Luke's Properties YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to walk you through my 6-step framework for closing rent-to-rent deals. This is the exact framework that I teach my students. This is the exact framework that I've used to secure my first rent-to-rent deal of 2025. And it took me just 10 weeks from the start of the year to do so. So just copy this framework, plug it into your business, and I guarantee you results. Let's get into it. So step 1 is to identify your ideal property. Now, not every property is worth pitching, so you need to focus on HMOs and focus on underperforming 2 to 4 bed properties in good areas with high demand. Now, I think you should be looking at houses rather than apartments or flats. Over the last 7 years of doing rent to rent, I've learned that apartments and flats can be quite difficult to operate as rent to rents. You've got other leaseholders to consider, neighbours to the left and right, sometimes above and below. Sometimes there can be issues with installing a key safe outside. For these types of reasons, it's more difficult to operate with flats and apartments than it is houses. So I would only focus on houses for rent to rent. Now, more specifically, houses that are in perfect condition aren't going to be the best properties for you because the landlords of those houses are going to have a long line of people waiting to rent those houses from them. And it's going to be far more difficult for you to pitch rent to rent to them than it would be if the properties were slightly tired, slightly old, and in need of some modernization, some creativity, and just general improvement. So I would only target houses, but more specifically, I would target old, tired houses with landlords who either are asset rich but cash poor, so they don't have cash to invest in the property to improve it, or they just don't want to because they're tight. And I would focus on approaching landlords that are tired themselves, tired of managing HMOs, tired of dealing with tenants, and they're at a stage in their life where they're looking for a more hands-off approach. They're more than likely approaching retirement and they're just looking for a more hassle-free solution. And that's when your service comes in. So not every property is worth pitching. So you need to identify the ideal property. So you found your ideal property. The next step is to do your numbers. Before reaching out, make sure that the deal stacks. You do this by analysing the deal, analysing the numbers. You need to work out your gross income, whether your plan is to rent the property out by the room or as a serviced accommodation, by the night or by the week. You need to work out exactly how much you can potentially make in terms of gross income. Then you need to deduct your expenses. So you have to be able to work out your expenses, how much it's going to cost you to run the property. How much does the water cost, the gas, the electric, the Wi-Fi? How much guaranteed rent can you offer the landlord? Once you've worked out your expenses, then this equation becomes quite simple. You work out your income minus expenses, and that's going to give you your profit. A good rule of thumb that I like to teach my students is the profit should be a minimum of £600 per month, and you should make back your initial investment in no more than 6 months. So gross income minus expenses equals profit. So you found your ideal property, you've done your numbers, and the deal stacks. Now it's time to make contact. So step 3 is make initial contact. This is where you start picking up the phone and calling agents and landlords. Now your goal here is to simply arrange a viewing. You're not trying to pitch over the phone. The goal is to book a viewing, not to pitch straight away. Keep it casual and professional. All you're trying to do is simply arrange a viewing. You don't need to mention anything about a company. You don't need to mention anything about your plans with the property. All you have to do is book a viewing. It's very straightforward. Set a date and a time that you would like to view the property. Say this to the agent or landlord and book the viewing in. Once you're at the viewing, you can then assess the property and work out if it's even worth pitching. But you can't get to that stage if you don't book the viewing in. So step 3, initial contact, pick up the phone and book a viewing. Then we move on to step 4, viewing and qualification. Now the goal here is to gather information. If you're viewing an HMO, you want to find out if the property is HMO licensed, if it's been licensed in the past, maybe the license has expired, but the property has grandfather rights, which means you could work with the landlord and get an HMO license renewal quite easily. So ask questions. Has the property been licensed as an HMO in the past? Has the property ever been rented to a company before? All you're doing here is trying to work out the landlord's wants and needs. You need to know what the landlord wants and needs before you pitch, so you can use these wants and needs in your pitch. If you don't know what the landlord wants, then you can't solve their problems. And if you can't solve their problems, then you're not adding value to them. And if you're not adding value, then your whole offer is pointless. So on the viewing, you want to ask specific questions about the property. It's also a good chance to get to know the landlord. If the landlord's showing you around, then ask questions. Find out about the landlord as a person. Try and build some sort of common ground. Start to build a rapport. Be friendly and professional, because you need to know if the property is a good fit for you but you also need to know if the landlord is going to be a good fit for you. You don't want to be working with landlords that are going to be difficult to deal with, that don't want to reinvest into their property if something breaks, that are hard to get hold of and just generally difficult to deal with. You want to work with landlords that you have a synergy with, landlords that understand their responsibilities as a landlord, and generally speaking, you want to work with landlords that have an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset. So just as you're qualifying the property, qualify the landlord too. Don't just try and force a deal for the sake of it just because you want it, because I promise you, speaking from experience, one bad landlord can stress you out and slow your business down dramatically. So don't force it. Once you've viewed and qualified the landlord and the property and you've asked some key questions, the next step, step 5, is pitching your offer. Now you don't need to do this face to face. You could go away and do some due diligence, do some more numbers and make an offer the following day. But when you make your offer, you can do this over email or even on the phone if that feels more comfortable. But when you make your offer, you need to include the major selling points of your business. So you should be offering guaranteed rent, no voids, a full management service, and generally speaking, your offer is going to give a landlord long-term peace of mind. You should use the landlord's pain points to guide your pitch. So when you were qualifying the landlord and asking key questions and building a rapport, you should have been making mental notes and maybe even making notes in your phone when you leave the property of what the landlord wants. They might say things to you like, I just don't want to deal with tenants anymore, or I've had bad tenants in the past that haven't paid, or I'm getting on a bit now, I just want passive income without any of the headache. These are all statements that you should be making a note of because you're going to use them. You need to use the landlord's pain points to guide your pitch. Your pitch should solve their problems. That's how you're going to get the deals over the line. Always remember that money follows value, and value is created when a problem is solved. So you need to solve the landlord's problems. If you can't solve any of their problems, then you're not adding value and there's no business to be done because you're not helping them in any way. You have to solve their problems. So actively listen, and I mean really listen, make notes of the landlord's pain points and then use them in your pitch later on. So the next step is step 6. You need to follow up and handle objections. Now, once you've pitched the landlord the following day, they may have some objections, some questions about how your business runs, maybe some fears or some gaps in their knowledge. So your job is to be able to answer these questions, handle their objections, and give them peace of mind. You won't close the deal on the spot 90% of the time, and you won't close the day after once you've made the offer. Most of the time, there'll be a back and forth negotiation process that happens after you've made your offer, and this can take 1 to 2 weeks sometimes. The landlord will ask you further questions. They'll also do some due diligence on you. The more you can speak to them, the more you can build a rapport, the better you can handle their objections with good professional answers, the more they're going to trust you. And the more they trust you, the closer you get to getting those keys. Some typical landlord objections that you might hear will be, what if the tenants don't pay rent? Who will be living in the property? What if the tenants damage the property? And you need to be able to answer these questions efficiently and honestly. Now, if you need help with handling landlord objections, then I suggest the next video you watch will be of me handling these exact objections on the phone. I would advise you to watch this video, listen carefully, make some notes, and copy what I say. Landlords normally have the same 5 to 8 objections and questions that they need answering before they agree to your offer. So watch back the video that I suggest, make some notes, and copy what I say. Most landlords don't just say yes straight away. They want to dig a little bit deeper. They want to find out a bit more about you and how your service works. So you need to be able to explain this concisely. You should always follow up with landlords as well. The most recent rent-to-rent deal that I've agreed on a few weeks ago, the landlord initially declined my offer, and then a week later, he called me back and he agreed to it. I simply left the offer on the table. I emailed him after he had declined my offer with some comparable properties to back up my offer and demonstrate that it was fair. And then a few days later, he contacted me back and agreed to my offer. So always follow up, leave the offer on the table, be professional and polite, and move on. If you've made a good offer and the landlord is intelligent and savvy, then they're going to go for it. You just have to make your offer and be willing to walk away. If it's a fair offer, then they might take some time to think about it and come back to you. So always follow up. Don't sulk or have any attitude if you get turned down. It's all part of the game. Be professional, be polite, leave the offer on the table and move on. You never know, they might contact you later on down the line. This has happened many times for me over the last 7 years. So that's my 6-step rent-to-rent sales framework. You have to be able to turn viewings into deals. You need to be confident, show the landlord what's in it for them, lead with value, and follow up like a pro. Now, to become skilled at this 6-step framework, it's helpful to know the formula for skill, which is volume plus time equals skill. So the more times you work through these 6 steps over a sustained period of time will give you the result of becoming more skilled. And the more skilled you are, the easier this will become. You need to practice, you need to iterate, improve, and repeat. Volume plus time equals skill. Now, to get my most recent rent-to-rent deal, I sent out 500 letters directly to landlords. I sent 100 messages online. I booked 20 viewings. Out of those viewings, I made 4 offers, and out of those 4 offers, I got 1 deal. And that took me 10 weeks from the start of 2025. And I used this exact 6-step framework. So it works. And this is the same framework that I teach my students. One of my students, a teacher that I've been working with over the last 7 weeks, she's about to sign her first rent-to-rent deal any day now. She's agreed terms. The landlord's doing a refurbishment at the moment. She's about to furnish the property, set it up, and start marketing it to working professionals. And once it's all rented out, she's going to make around £700 to £800 per month in profit from a £3,000 investment. And you can do this too. You just have to follow my framework and be willing to practice, iterate, improve, and repeat. The more you do this, the better you'll become. Volume plus time equals skill. Give yourself a realistic time horizon to achieve this. To get good at this process, it's normally going to take you between 3 to 6 months. If you're an absolute savage, then you might be able to do it in 2 to 3 months. But practice makes better. You must be willing to commit to a high volume of outreach over a consistent period of time to develop skill. So just to summarize, guys, step 1, identify your ideal property. Step 2, do your numbers first. Step 3, make initial contact. Go for the viewing only. Step 4, viewing and qualification. Step 5, pitching your offer. Step 6, follow up and objection handling. Turn viewings into deals, be confident, show the landlord what's in it for them, lead with value, and follow up like a pro. Now, if you want me to help you do this and get your first rent-to-rent deal, then I'll put a link in the description below. Click the link and you'll be able to book in a free call with myself. On that call, we can make a plan for you and work out if we're a good fit to work with each other. If not, then just follow my framework. I teach this inside of my program. It works for me, it works for my students, and it can work for you too. So just copy my framework and I guarantee you'll get your first rent-to-rent deal in the next 3 to 6 months if you put the work in. I hope you've enjoyed this video, guys, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.